For everyone that has been with us since first thing this morning, I hope you've enjoyed the event so far today. This is our fourth and next to final panel, and we have on this panel the speakers that you've heard over the last hour. So I'd like to take a moment to introduce everyone. For anyone that is interested in speaking or connecting with any of the speakers that you've heard on the event so far, that big orange button at the top of the site will get you connected to any of the experts that you've heard over the course of the day today. Software Oasis does sponsor a lot of different events. So if there are different events that you'll be at, conferences in person, don't be surprised if you bump into a member of the team at a dinner. Anyways, I'd like to start by introducing everyone on the panel. We have Brad Micklea. He's the CEO of Jozu. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you.
And next, I'd like to introduce Alex Atzberger. He's the CEO over at Optimizely. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks, Michael. Great to be here.
Wonderful. And I will say we had a tremendous number of questions come in. So I don't think we're going to get through all of them, but we'll do our best. So I want to start right at the top. We had the first question came in for Brad, and it's from Tyler, who is just outside of Boise, Idaho. And Tyler is asking, for a company still at the web-only AI stage, what's the first concrete step you recommend to move up your maturity curve without taking on unsafe operational complexity?
Oh, that's a good question. So the reality is that as you move up that AI maturity curve, you unavoidably kind of broaden the scope of your potential security risk. So I would love to say that there is some magic path where you avoid all the security issues, but also move up that maturity ladder. I don't think it exists. However, I don't think it needs to be a massive undertaking to get the security in place to allow you to move up that ladder from kind of that first level to a slightly more mature level. For example, if you have a kind of AI policy gateway, which, surprise, surprise, we offer one, but we're certainly not the only one. There's other ones out there. But you can put something like that in place either centrally in your network or deployed to the laptops. And that can really help protect your organization as you move kind of from the simple chatbot to a little bit more open work. If you're starting to do more agentic work, you'll want to add to that kind of an isolated agentic kind of containment zone or sandbox with its own set of policies. One thing to watch for with that is the containment itself is the kind of basic foundation. You kind of have to have that. Beyond that, I would always recommend looking for admission policies and tool use policies, because as MCP servers get richer and richer with more and more tools, it becomes pretty common that you'd want to say, well, my agent has to have access to, let's say, 20 of the tools in this MCP server, but not to the dangerous 5, not to delete, not to drop tables, not to, do other things that are very risky. But of course, it's got to be able to read, it's got to be able to do some writes, or it's not really useful. So you've got to have something that can do those kind of more fine-grained choices. Those tools exist, so it's not a terribly hard lift, but you are going to have to kind of make some of those protections in place before I would recommend moving whole hog to kind of an agentic use case. Oh, you're muted, Michael.
So really a lot of small steps along the way towards where you're heading. Interesting. Alex, the next question came in for you, and this comes to us from Hannah, who is in Halifax, Nova Scotia, up in Canada. And Hannah's asking, for a marketing team stuck at summarize this and draft that, what is the first below the waterline workflow you'd automate to prove AI can move real KPIs?
Oh, that's a great question. I love that question. You know, it's remarkable how many marketing teams today are still in that, you know, draft this for me or do that thing for me, that are very simple use cases. And I always think about it, there's things that you are stuck with in work right now that just take up a lot of time, yeah, where there's an ability to use agentic capabilities to really get rid of some of the mundane tasks. Yeah. So for a lot of our customers, this means approval flows, compliance checks, brand checks, for instance. So that's one bucket of things that are below the water because you couldn't really do that before at scale, and now you can. The other one that's below the waterline that we see a lot of traction on and where a lot of customers show a lot of interest on is personalization at scale. And what that means is, imagine if you are, I don't know your business, if you're in the B2B space or in the B2C side, but let's say, for instance, in B2B, you have different accounts that you are targeting. Today, the content to target these accounts, you could probably do this for 5 or 10 accounts, create maybe personalized landing pages, etc. But that's pretty much how much you can do in order to make it a memorable and good experience. Now, in the combination of being able to actually research an account, understand their priorities, look at the data that you have of the account, you can actually start to assemble a much more richer, personalized experience and launch this to many, many more accounts at scale. And that's where we see a lot of our customers see, you know, just an ability to take an account-based marketing program and give it real meat and meaning, because you're now actually scaling the personalization to accounts. So I think it's typically between these two things. One is, can I improve the marketer experience in a more meaningful way than just say, like, hey, create me a piece of content, but actually take an entire workflow and automate it. And then the second part is, can I actually improve the customer experience? So it's either the marketer experience simplification, or it's actually that use case around improving the customer experience. But the exciting part is that there's really an infinite amount of use cases to go after. And one of the things that we oftentimes workshop with customers on is the simple matrix of saying, what's the impact on one scale and what's the level of difficulty to get there? And just sometimes doing the exercise together as a team to say, like, hey, where our initiatives fit will actually lead you to the right place. Because I would recommend do something that is moderately difficult. Don't choose the most difficult case at first, yeah, and then think about, again, the level of impact. But that's typically the best way to identify some of these below the waterline opportunities for your marketing team. Love the question.
Yeah, fantastic. And I want to make sure we get to a few of our international attendees. So Liam is joining us from Dunedin, New Zealand, and had a question for Brad. So Liam is asking, for organizations with strong MLOps but weak security, how do you stitch model packaging, deployment, and guardrails together so neither side becomes the bottleneck?
Oof, that's a great question. So I think the key is that the ML teams, you don't want to mess with their workflow too much. They've got an efficient workflow. They work well in it. Typically, the ML teams I've worked with work, very quickly. You don't want to slow that stuff down. What you can do, though, is plug into the tools they're used to using already. Maybe that's an ML flow, maybe it's weights and biases, whatever those tools are. You plug into those something like the open source KitOps project, which then can spit out the files that they create, not as just random files on a hard drive somewhere, which are very difficult to secure, very difficult to audit, very difficult to control, but as those cryptographically secured and versioned packages. Now that happens kind of in the background. It's actually honestly invisible to the ML team, but it gets the security team a massive win. Then you've got something like Jozu that can ingest those. The security team can do the vulnerability analysis, Jozu does the vulnerability analysis, and the security team can share that back with that ML team. Now they're interacting just kind of as they always would. They're using the same tools that they're comfortable with and they're used to. That's how you keep the speed going, but bolt on a massive amount more security. So that's kind of how I would approach it.
Fantastic. The next question comes to us for Alex, and it's from Daniela, who is in Brno in the Czech Republic. And Daniela is asking, when marketers worry that AI will replace our creativity, how do you practically position agentic platforms as amplifiers of human ideas rather than substitutes?
Yeah, Daniela, it's a question that I think a lot about, and I come back to a framework that I recently heard that I think works really well, which is what makes us human. And it's a model thinking about 5 different C's, the letter C. One is the creativity that we have. One is the curiosity that we have. There's the ability for us to communicate. There's the ability for us to be courageous and take risks. Yeah. And these are all deeply human traits. And then the other one is compassion, that we actually have compassion for the customer. So I believe there are things that are truly human that matter in marketing a lot, because marketing is ultimately about human behaviors. If I want to connect with a customer or with a prospect, it's about these emotional connection points that exist. And so it's ultimately about amplifying those. In my point of view, most marketing organizations that I have encountered, there's a lot of work that's being done internally. We call this work about work, rather than work about actually creating a better customer experience, creating better content, being more compassionate. And so for me, Daniela, the ability to actually scale marketing through agentic is that ability to take away that mundane part, the work about work part, that hinders you today from spending the time on actually understanding the customer, creating materials that matter more to the customer. And so in some ways, I hope that actually AI allows us to be much better marketers, much more human marketers, because we no longer need to spend the time on the work about work. So that's how I address the question, because in my point of view, it should actually be a glorious decade of marketing coming up, because marketers can spend so much more time on the stuff that really, really matters. And again, these 5 C's are one way to think about that. And I think it's actually a pretty good framework. And I think it really applies more in marketing than pretty much any other function in an enterprise, because the marketing function should be creative and curious and compassionate and communicative and courageous.
Very well said. The next question came in for Brad, and it's from Jenna, who is just outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee, here back in the US. And Jenna is asking, you said in your presentation that your AI maturity level is your strategy. How should boards read that maturity curve when deciding where to invest or cut in next year's budget?
Oof. Yeah. So that's I think that really gets to the crux of this whole argument and the whole transformation that everybody is kind of undergoing right now. I think that from a board perspective, their job is to do 2 things simultaneously. And it's tough. Being a board member is never easy. One of them is to try and push the company forward, push the company to make that next maturity curve leap. But at the same time, the board has to kind of do that trust but verify that the company is making those leaps with the right protections in place. And I think of this a lot as a dad, with the way you kind of guide your kids as they're growing up. You always push them to go a little further, to try to leap a little higher, run a little faster, but you never do it in a dangerous environment. You don't tell them to do that where you think they're going to get hurt. You put them in a safe space and then say, now push yourself, because you're in the safe space. In the same thing in a company, they've got to create that secure, governed environment, and then they've got to push themselves to make those maturity leaps. And I think that the board can be a massive help in doing that. or the board can be a massive hindrance in doing that if they don't approach it correctly, if they overweight one or the other.
Some really fantastic questions that have come in today over the course of this entire event. I want to point out, well, you see me throughout the entire event. There are a lot of people on the Software Oasis team behind the scenes curating and bringing forth the questions that you're hearing from the audience. So really just a great shout out to everyone on all ends, to be honest. But Alex, the next question came to us from, let's see here, from Clear, who is in Fort Collins, Colorado. So again, here in the US. And Clear said, you described in your presentation LLMs as raw power needing a harness. What capabilities must that harness have before you trust agents with end-to-end campaign orchestration?
Clear, another very good question. When we think about the harness, and it's obviously moving in the market because of the fast advances across technology. But when we think about a harness, the first thing to know about most LLMs and most use cases have been very much focused on individual productivity, meaning I use Claude or you use ChatGPT, and we basically do one activity with a couple of activities with it, but it's very individual. So one of the beliefs we have, in order for a marketing harness to work, it needs to be an organizational capability, which means there needs to be things like organizational memory. There need to be an organizational concept of sharing artifacts that are created through AI. There needs to be a concept of agents that are being created to be shared amongst other folks. So it's going from what we would call a single player mode to really a multiplayer mode. And that's really important for organizational adoption. And I think that's the difference between the consumer use case of AI versus literally a business use case of AI. So the harness needs to provide that ability to actually share capabilities across the organization. And that really then really augments and multiplies the effect that AI can have in the organization. The second piece to that is, as you actually work as an organization, you don't always want to start again from zero. You want to start to build organizational memory as well, so that it understands the campaigns that you're running, that it understands the brand language that you have, it understands the skills that you gave it. So we believe that all the skill sets, all the context that you provide needs to be, again, provided both at an organization level, and you can do this also as an individual employee, but it's important that you have that as an organization level. That needs to be part of the harness as well. And then the third part that we believe is really critical in the harness is really fantastic connectors to your entire enterprise. And I think Brad actually mentioned a couple of the things that you need to think about, like an MCP server. It's not like an MCP server. Like there's lots of differences of how you actually set it up, what capabilities, what's read, what's write, what are the capabilities that you have. A simple example in most organizations we do business with is that they have Salesforce. So if you have Salesforce as your customer system of record, can you use your marketing harness to access Salesforce records? What information can you pull out of that Salesforce record? Yeah. How can it help you to create a better campaign? Those are all things that you can define in the harness, but the harness needs to make it very easy for any marketing employee to connect to the systems they need in order to get their work done. Because if it gets too complicated, I think the adoption will lag. I like to compare this to the Palm Pilot. Maybe some people are old enough to remember the Palm Pilot. But basically, you need to connect it through a cradle. You needed to change the way you write with the pen. I feel we're in the Palm Pilot area of AI still. And we need to make it much, much simpler. And so I think the harness needs to provide that user level improvement. That's just a little bit on the harness. We can go a lot longer, but I see Michael having a lot of questions to get to. So over to you, Michael.
No, that's great. I just want to make sure we can get to as many of the questions that came in as possible. Brad, the next question comes to us from Ethan, who's in Lincoln, Nebraska. And Ethan is asking, How do you recommend large enterprises measure progress along the AI maturity curve that you spoke about, beyond counting pilots or the number of agents in production?
So I will give what I think is the most accurate answer, but it's going to be the least helpful because it's a bit of a cop-out. But it really depends a little bit on your organization for sure. Let's try and come up with something more usefully generalizable, though. I think, and I think Alex in some way said this earlier in one of his answers too, you've got to focus on the impact on your customers. If what you're doing with AI is not materially improving the life of your customers, or the kind of core business value, core business metrics of your particular company, it's probably not really worth it, especially considering what can be the fairly high cost of AI. I think the one thing I would resist, and I understand why people do this at the very beginning, and it is maybe not a bad thing to do it as a short term, is I don't think you should key in too heavily on, hey, if you're using lots of tokens, then you're a good employee doing good stuff with AI. That's kind of like saying you're using the car right if you're spending a lot of gas. Well, not necessarily. So I think you got to focus more on those ultimate outbound impact metrics as the goal. Now, the one modification I would say to that is it's tempting to say, well, we should be able to 10x some outbound, and you should eventually. But don't be afraid to say, hey, we're going to 1.5x, or we're going to improve it by 20%, this quarter, and then another 10% next quarter, and then another 30% the quarter after that. And as long as you're making that progress and it's getting better and better, I know with my own teams, it took a couple quarters for the engineering team to really kind of get their head around how best to use AI. This is very new technology, and it's changing the way we work as humans. And it's not, so you got to kind of adapt to it. Once we got kind of past that kind of lumpy beginning phase, though, then things really started to take off. So I think as an organization, you got to kind of build that growth pattern into your expectations too.
Fantastic. And Alex, the next question came in to us from Jared, who's looks like just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. And Jared is asking, for a mid-market brand like ours with a lean team, how do you advise splitting focus between quick above the waterline wins and deeper multi-agent workflows that take longer to build?
Yeah, Jared, my advice would be, number one, I think especially for leaner teams, AI can be an incredible multiplier, and we see this across our customer base. And where we see that especially mid-market teams or smaller marketing teams get a lot of lift from is especially around the area of content marketing, scaling content marketing, thinking about taking one asset and creating it in 15 different versions for different channels. Like, that's where there's a lot of potential to get to some real multiplication impact, because you just wouldn't have otherwise the time or the resources to do this. The effort to get there is truly in the setup. And I think that's the hardest part sometimes for organizations, is it takes time to get to the outcome that you want, and you do need to invest the time. And so this is this trade-off, but it's kind of like anything in life. If you invest it up front, you're going to get the benefit afterwards. And I would suggest pick a few initiatives. It's not about doing a long list. I would put 2 or 3 up to really go into them in detail, rather than trying to do too many different things. And I would also iterate. What we have found is, don't go for perfection right from the beginning. It really is this iterative mindset of saying, like, hey, this is working, let's do the next step. Oh no, we need to refine this, let's go here. The benefit that you have as a smaller team versus the large companies is, in a lot of larger companies, there is so much AI creation happening that people have a coordination problem now, because there's nearly too much agent overflow. And then it's kind of like, hey, how do I put the genie back in the box? Because now everything has become very complicated. You actually have the ability to choose very specific initiatives. And I would probably initially say, look, again, don't go for the most complicated use case somewhere under the waterline that's, hard to process. I would go for the ones that are easier to implement, but have a good, high or moderate return, so that you can actually prove the concept. And once you're in that, then it starts to become easier to scale and say, like, hey, we have the confidence to do the next one and the next one. But content marketing, scaling, things like industry versioning, thinking about like, oh, we need to create certain documentation for different regulatory environments. That's where typically the AI use cases, especially for leaner teams, make direct sense.
Fantastic. Well, with that, I think we are right at the end of our time for this panel. I want to keep everybody on track for the next presentation. We do have a final panel coming up at the end of the event. For anybody that would like to reach out to either Brad or Alex or any of the other speakers that you've heard on the event up until now, that big orange button at the top of the site will get you connected. And we very much appreciate your joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Alex, Brad, thank you so much for your time and the wonderful presentations.
Thank you. It was a
Appreciate
pleasure.
it. Thank you.